Robert Boland. He's an attorney, professor, and director of sports administration in the MBA program at Ohio University. He's with us here for a couple of minutes on Tiki and Tierney. Robert, happy holidays. Appreciate a few minutes. How are you, sir?
Thanks so much, man. I'm happy to be with you.
Yeah, so in short, and I know we'll probably hit a few things here, a couple of different subsets of the most basic question, but what options does Peyton Manning have this morning, right now?
Well, right now, I think the biggest issue as we start to look at this is it doesn't appear that he's facing any kind of NFL sanction, even if his career continues beyond this season because of the timing that comes out. I think the issue is how does he defend his legacy, and that is can he sue anyone for defamation? And obviously, the most logical target would be Al Jazeera. They're deep pocketed. The problem of a public figure suing any media defendant is a Supreme Court doctrine that came up in the 1960s in the Times v. Sullivan case that basically says if it's a newsworthy issue involving a public figure, that then the news service has to have clearly erred and what's called committed actual malice, which is basically either to have known it was wrong and gone ahead with the story anyway, or failed to discover something that would make it clearly wrong. And it doesn't appear that Al Jazeera, at least on the face of these reports, is going to probably be liable to Manning in this situation. On the other hand, this gentleman Sly, who's sort of at the center of the story, who made all the statements that are reported in the Al Jazeera documentary, he's a pretty easy target because now he's gone on video and with reporters and said, no, I made it all up. Well, his initial statements to Al Jazeera then are, on their face, false and defamatory. And whether he was acting in the scope of this clinic's support, well, that's another issue. So there are some really interesting issues about this. But if we think back to some of the other investigations, and I'm not, this is still speculating wildly. Mm-hmm. It was the defense of the issues that caused more problems for some of the athletes that in recent years have gone through this, as opposed to maybe there was an admission, maybe there's a mistake, and that's one of the issues. There's one more tort out there that maybe could be claimed, and it's called false light. It's a very unknown lawsuit action. It's not even admissible in there, not even available in New York, but in many states it might be. And it's basically when a news media report without the malice, but puts someone in a false light. In other words, we report on child molesters, and the next picture is somebody else.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Manning has the availability of that, but that may be something that's available to him. His wife may have some actions here, particularly if her privacy has been invaded, because she's not the public figure that Manning is on almost any test. So that would make her a limited purpose public figure. So that's kind of the law of defamation here. It's a hard one to win, mm-hmm. and it's a tricky one because everything Manning says now also is now able to be used against him, not in the criminal context, but it begins to paint his surface.
Mm-hmm. Which is what he's got to really weigh. That's Robert Boland, who's an attorney, also director, professor, sports administration, MBA program at Ohio University, helping us out with the Peyton Manning stuff here on Tiki and Tierney.
Now, Robert, we know that you were on Al Jazeera earlier. Help us clear. Al Jazeera is a couple of things. One, it's Al Jazeera, which is in the Arabian Peninsula. There's Al Jazeera English, and then there's also Al Jazeera America. This report comes from which branch of that, and why are they reporting on this in this country, I guess is the question that I think a lot of people are going to ask who aren't familiar with what Al Jazeera actually does.
Yeah, we're probably a little shocked by it. Al Jazeera is an Arabian news service that comes out of the Middle East. It, however, has branches in England that's a very well-respected kind of English language news service. And about 2 or 3 years ago, they opened with a news channel in the United States. They've been kind enough to have me on to talk about sports stories. I would probably tell you they're a pretty credible, what I would describe, journalistic news service right here in the United States right now with Al Jazeera America. This report was aired between, and I don't know who the creator was, whether it was Al Jazeera, the English branch, or whether it was Al Jazeera America that necessarily created the documentary. But I would tell you that if you like news on some level, they're sort of an apolitical news service, maybe a little like the BBC or Reuters or maybe even CNN, without a whole lot of bias that you get from some of the other ones that are very political. I know in the United States we kind of think of them as being biased, but that they don't tend to be in their news production. And a lot of the people working there are people that worked at CNN or worked at ABC News or other places. So, or the BBC. So fairly credible people in general with it. So the documentary was created and it was aired here on Al Jazeera America yesterday, and they do cover sports. They don't do live telecasts of sports, but they certainly cover sports news with some regularity. And they had me on this morning to just talk about what the impact of whether there is doping in professional sports and where it goes. And this was more of, if you watch the report, it's available I think on the Huffington Post website now too. If you watch it, it's very much like a 60 Minutes or a 2020 report, not so much on athletes, but on how these doping entities exist in the Bahamas, on the periphery of law and regulation, and how these clinics then can move human growth hormone, which is a controlled substance in the United States, only to be used for dwarfism and a few other uses, to people who use it for a variety of other things, including athletes.
You know, Robert, the thing that we do probably more than anything, and it gets annoying after a while, is trying to, fend off this wave of criticism, growing criticism for athletes and, people who are trying to hop on and destroy legacies. And I don't mean those who actually have truly cheated. If you do the crime, you got to do the time, whether it's verbally or actually in the literal legal sense. But I look at somebody like Peyton Manning, and without knowing him, I sense, as Tiki does as well, that he's highly protective of the way he's perceived, his legacy, and, for how he's going to be remembered. So I guess if you were advising Peyton, clearly you'd have to have a very lengthy, honest chat before you fully come up with an opinion on how to advise him. But if he says to you, Robert, listen, I need to eradicate the notion that I'm a cheater, would you then say, let's go ahead and do this? Or would you say, Peyton, it's going to open up everything and your life is going to be probed and dissected in a manner that you might not want it to be? How would you advise him?
Well, I that's a great question, because I think that is the really fundamental question about Peyton Manning's involvement in this. He doesn't face under the NFL's drug policy or really when you think about the timing of his career, any sanction from the league. This is all about his legacy and his ability to sort of exercise his chosen post career as a public entity, a former athlete of great virtue and great renown. So the challenge is, how do you deal with this? My advice in looking at this on the historical basis is, and we have some antecedents, Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, Alex Rodriguez have gotten into trouble, not so much from any of their actions, but from their denials and their backing away from this. So I would almost say to you that if there is some truth, even a kernel of truth, probably confronting that as clearly as possible, saying, hypothetically, I was an athlete with a serious injury. I went to people, I trusted in people, I did it under the medical advice of the team doctors, and maybe something happened that I don't know about, or something like that. I think the public would still embrace it.
I got to tell you, Rob, I disagree. I think that the public is desensitized to that response because we've gotten it so many times. I don't think people want to hear that.
Well, I think they would forgive it. They would forgive it in mission, and certainly, obviously closer to home for all of us, it was Andy Pettit made that kind of admission quickly, and the public has certainly embraced him and forgiven him. I think the problem you get into is this is probably going to create investigations by government, and that's the key issue here. That the records of this clinic will probably be subpoenaed. They will probably come out. And that's the issue I think you have to be conscious of.
Yeah, so if he knows that's coming out, he might as well say something and admit it.
You might as well say something. You might as well say something of it that explains it before it gets out, and don't get caught in the denial that might involve criminal penalties and might really involve the loss of his reputation.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff, Robert. Appreciate some clarification, man. Thanks for hopping on. Well done.
Absolutely. Always. Thank you very much, gentlemen.